Hi everybody, I'm Girl Writes What, and I am feeling a little bummed out today. I just finished reading a long paper by Adam Jones called The Globe and Mails, The Other Side of Gender Bias in Canada's National Newspaper. And it's got me a little depressed. I'm going to leave the link in the low bar for those of you who enjoy reading things that are completely pessimistic and leave you feeling like throwing up your hands, but I'll just describe it for you guys a little bit. The paper explores the extent to which violent victimization of males is normalized by our society, while violent victimization of females is just vastly overstated and overemphasized in comparison. Um, and while I got kind of annoyed at the author's constant pandering to feminism about its efforts to bring domestic and sexual violence against women into the arena of intellectual and social analysis, because frankly, I think most of the feminist theory around that is kind of bullshit. Uh, the paper really got me thinking about the magnitude of the problem, which kind of in turn made me want to go put my head in an oven. I came across a comment on a women's forum the other day that really encapsulated the issue in a nutshell. We've got to fight against the rape of men too, especially the rape of young men. Many rapists were raped at a young age and developed a twisted version of how sex works. Not most men who are raped, mind you, but by standing up for young men who are sexually assaulted, we help women too. Now, a couple of things. That comment kind of assumes that rapists, adult rapists, are male, number one, uh, which is simply not the case. And number two, I have a 9-year-old son. And if he ever came to me to tell me that he'd been molested or raped, I think the last fucking thing on my mind would be standing up for him in order to benefit a bunch of future women that I've never even fucking met. My first concern would be for my son and his pain, and maybe that's just me, but that comment just says a lot about how we look at things. And after reading Adam Jones's paper on media coverage of violence suffered by women and how it's always framed as intolerable and abominable, and contrasting it with the coverage of the violence suffered in vastly higher numbers and severity by men, which is just kind of no big deal. It got me thinking about society, culture, social constructs, and finally evolutionary psychology. And I know not everyone here is going to be on board with the idea of evo-psych, but honestly, I can't completely dismiss it. It may essentially be a theory rather than an empirical fact, but it seems to be backed up by a hell of a lot more empirical data than a lot of sociology and pretty much the entirety of feminist theory. And I think what we all tend to lose sight of in our nice, relaxed, comfortable, fight or flight ain't necessary Western lives is the fact that before and beyond and above everything else, we're animals. And we evolved physical gender differences, a huge amount of sexual dimorphism. Don't let any feminist tell you otherwise. Not when you can recognize a male voice from a female voice in one word over the phone. Or how, when you consider how human females are the only mammals that have breasts all the time, that you can tell a male face or a female from a female face, even without other identifying markers. So, honestly, I think it would really be naive in the extreme to believe that sexual dimorphism does not extend to the neurological, especially when we have scanning MRIs and CAT scans that are starting to really prove otherwise. But for those of you who will not countenance the idea of people behaving according to instinct or gender being at least partly innate, just imagine me saying not instinct, but cultural construct, and many of my points are going to remain in place and just as effective. So I'm going to, for the sake of simplicity, lay out evolutionary psychology as a kind of a four-part system. There's sex and individual reproduction, there's individual survival, there's tribal and family bonds, and there's collective survival and perpetuation. Now, one basic correlative aspect of all cultures, I think, worldwide, uh, would probably be the universal gender empathy gap, which Adam Jones touched on in his article, and which I see pretty much everywhere I go. This can be rendered down to a very, very simple tableau in a cave. You have a man with an injured leg, you have his mate who is pregnant, and you have their small child. There's no food, the man has to go out and hunt. His leg hurts like a son of a bitch, it'll slow him down, it'll put him at greater risk of becoming prey rather than predator, or being attacked by enemy tribesmen, or stumbling off the trail and into a ravine, or getting infected. If he cares about himself more than he cares about her, he'll stay home and nurse his leg, and the family may end up starving. If she cares about him more than she cares about herself or her children, she'll tell him to stay home and nurse his leg, and the family may starve. I think we're probably descended from a lot more people of both sexes who cared more about the well-being of women than the well-being of men. Than we are from people who exercise the opposite dynamic or a different dynamic. And even if you look at nagging as a predominantly female behavior, that can be traced back to that family in the cave too. Way back then, when a man had a problem like being hungry, he had a great deal of personal wherewithal to deal with it on his own. When a woman, especially a pregnant one or one with a small child, had a similar problem, she usually had to enlist some help to solve that. And when that assistance posed risk or danger to the helpers, emotional manipulation and persistence would probably be pretty necessary to convince those helpers to put themselves at risk for her benefit. I've said before that the weapon a man used to defend his home was a spear. The weapon a woman used was a man. And I don't see much reason to believe that women would not have evolved the necessary neural hardware with which to develop the skills to use him. Those are the roles that both developed from and guided our evolution, or our societal development, for those of you Evo-psych deniers, as a species, as humanity. And those roles just inform a shit ton of our modern human behavior. And if you can train yourself to observe human behavior through a lens of those four instinctive drives, so much just becomes just blatantly obvious. It's not even funny how obvious it can be. Structured societies have always been sort of a balanced interplay between those four drives and the particular environmental conditions those societies exist in an attempt to maintain social cohesion and growth. One aspect of our collective survival instincts is just easily discernible in our instinctive views of men and women as groups. Those views tend to be fairly homogenous across cultures. They transcend individual instinct and encompass what might be called a collective human consciousness. And they're views that are common to both religious fundamentalists and to feminists, even if they disagree on why they manifest or how they should be dealt with. In survivalist societies, where life is harsh, cheap, and soon over, you often find the most restrictive cultural or religious constructs designed to repress both individual survival and individual sexuality in favor of collective instinct. Part of the sexual repression of individuals is enacted to protect familial bonds. In a society of divorce and single motherhood, social cohesion tends to be undermined by all kinds of behavioral disorders, youth criminality and suicide, general aimlessness of young people, and just social social chaos. The happiness and even the life of an individual will be sacrificed for the benefit of social order. And when you consider how people are sexually objectified, women tend to be objectified based on their physical attractiveness. Not very many people are willing to consider that men suffer sexual objectification as well, but they do. They're objectified based on their perceived role, provider and protector. Warren Farrell called it success objectification. It's really no surprise to me that one of the sexiest images to most women would be someone like Matthew McConaughey in a half-unbuttoned $500 shirt. He's handsome, he's rich, he's got social status, and he's got the physique of a protector as well. We make a huge deal out of the Taliban's repression of female sexuality when they order women to cover themselves from head to toe. This is seen as the worst sort of injustice, the worst sort of gender oppression. But at the same time, the Taliban also orders men to not wear flashy clothing or jewelry or exhibit other ostentatious trappings of wealth or success. And that represses male sexuality in the same way. You look at the roles they assign to men and women. Women are told to keep themselves safe and at home, and this is seen as a huge injustice, while men are expected to risk violence and even death to be public sphere agents, to bring home the bacon, and nobody really seems to care about that expectation. So while I think the Taliban is at least as restrictive of men as it is of women, and as harsh in enforcing the collective good at the expense of the individual, no one really seems to notice how males are oppressed under regimes like that, much less care. And it seems like regardless of how repressive or how relaxed a society is, how collectivistic or individualistic, how survivalist or how decadent, our collective views of men and women as groups seem to be just the hardest ones for us to shake. I mean, how do we see women as a group? We see women as in need of or deserving of protection, provision, help, and support, and as essentially beneficial to have around. Even when they're toxic, if society can afford it, we'll keep them around. How do we see men as a group? We see them as potential threats, as dangerous, as utilities that are disposable when necessary, tools of community provision and protection. This is collectivist survival instinct at its most basic. When you look at these kind of blanket sociological perceptions, of course, there's a gender empathy gap. And counter to what people would really like to believe, feminism hasn't really done anything to alter this collective human consciousness with regard to the most basic instinctive view of women as a group. Every article, every book, every effort on the part of activists seems to focus on and reinforce the idea of women as a class of people who need and deserve society's protection. Protection from domestic violence, protection from poverty, from discrimination, from harassment, from sexual objectification. They reinforce us as seeing women as a group as deserving of society's support. Quotas, incentive programs, education funding to encourage women to enter male-dominated fields. Society's provision, funding for women-only social programs and homeless shelters, draconian child support laws, all of it. And it really has done nothing at all to change society's perceptions that men as a group should suck it up and adapt their utility to the changing needs of women for that protection, provision, help, and support. Or if they don't, that it's okay to toss them into the dustbin of knuckle draggers no one should care about. Through rape and domestic violence theories, legislation, and campaigns that are just insanely gender biased, and constant criticism of toxic masculinity, feminism, it's only reinforced our perception of males as potentially or even inherently threatening and dangerous. It's done absolutely zero to draw awareness to the aspects of men's utility as protectors and providers that are detrimental to men. The male-dominated, dirty, sweaty, smelly, dangerous jobs are still predominantly male-dominated, aren't they? and they still kill men on the job at 20 times the rate of women. Feminism reinforces the permission our instincts give us to ignore the suffering of men by constantly framing our collective perception of the male role, whether it helps or harms a man, as not only male privilege, but somehow more damaging and oppressive to women than it is to the men themselves. By virtue of its theories, writings, and activism, feminism pulls society's collective empathy even more strongly in the direction it naturally wants to go, toward women and away from men. Instead of countering or challenging our collective perceptions of what is man and what is woman, feminism has only really succeeded in further entrenching it. And these collective perceptions are what we need to change if we're going to make a non-traditional society that is in any way sustainable. Because, when I read something as illuminating and as socially condemning as Adam Jones's paper, when I look at legislation like VAWA, when I read the FBI's revised definition of rape, which protects women from even more things a man can do to her, but does not protect men from the 40% of last year's rapists who are women. When I look at all the women-only social programs available for the homeless, while the majority male homeless population is left to sleep in cardboard boxes, when I hear yet another news story about a gunman who opened fire in a shopping mall, killing 13, 4 of whom were women, or read an article about the brave rescue workers who toiled for hours to save 25 trapped minors, all of whom were men, but none of whom seem to have gender in that context. When I have to listen to people talk about how rape culture normalizes sexual violence against women in a society when male rapists are beaten and even murdered by vigilantes, and while sexual violence against men is constantly framed as either a joke or a favor done to the victim, when I see feminists bitching about the misogyny in the media, when it's okay to laugh at Catherine Becker's castration of her husband on daytime national TV, when I see chopping off part of a baby boy's penis freely spoken of as a fucking aesthetic preference among American women, well, if there's a single female left in the hills of Tibet who was ritually deflowered, it's just condemned as systemic global misogyny at its most evil. If I have to hear much more of that, I'm just going to have to throw up my hands, get myself drunk as fuck, and wait for the apocalypse. And I don't know whose pandering to instinct disgusts or disturbs me more. Social conservatives and religious fundamentalists who want to repress individualistic instincts to the point of obliterating any sort of humanistic individuality, or feminists who pander to the most base of female instincts at the expense of everybody else, and exploit our collective perceptions of men and women to undermine all of it, everything. All of us. I mean, if I had to choose, choose the evolved over the purely animalistic, I'm thinking I'd probably see a little less Lord of the Flies in the religious right than I do in the so-called progressive feminist movement. And that's just one of the most discouraging realizations I've had since I started exploring gender. If social conservatism is individual human instinct repressed for the good of the collective, then feminism just seems to be the reptilian brain unleashed. Social conservatism is an attempt to tame the beast in us for our own good, and feminism is a movement seeking to free it to run roughshod over everything in its path. And I don't know if there is any way to change any of this when, number one, feminism has its hooks into the mainstream media, like all the way through it, and it controls what we're exposed to. And when what they're showing us just feels so right to so many people, so natural, I don't know how to change it. And I guess that might be where I wish that that I was like some people and couldn't put any kind of credence in evolutionary psychology. Because if it was all just a social construct, it would be a hell of a lot fucking easier to undo. And I just really don't think it is going to be easy like that. I really don't. So I guess that's why I'm feeling a little bummed out, a little pessimistic, and just kind of like I wouldn't mind pounding back a bottle of wine right now. So maybe I'll go do that instead of cleaning my meat slicer and washing my frying pans. So I guess on that depressing note, I'll see y'all later.